In the year 2036, humanity's population exploded, leading to severe depletion of Earth's resources and extreme environmental pollution. To ensure the survival of the human race, scientists set their sights on an old neighbor, Mars, which had been orbiting Earth for decades. Probes carrying algae and jujube seeds were sent to Mars to propagate life and create oxygen for human habitation. 20 years passed, and the oxygen levels on Mars steadily increased, approaching a level suitable for human life. But one day, the oxygen levels began to drop unexpectedly. Left with no choice, a team of scientists was dispatched to investigate. Among them was the mission commander, Ellie, the only female member, and the biologist, accompanied by some of the brightest minds in their respective fields. They were also joined by a robotic dog, Pathfinder, for exploration. After a long journey, the spacecraft detached from the space station and began its descent towards Mars. Just as they prepared to release the landing capsule, a powerful solar storm hit, bombarding the ship with gamma rays and causing extensive damage. The calm and collected Blas instructed the team to enter the landing module, while he stayed behind to manually assist in their escape. However, the module's navigation system was also damaged, forcing them to switch to manual control. They jettisoned the landing gear containing the robotic dog and deployed airbags for a rough landing on the edge of a cliff, tumbling down before finally coming to a stop. The survivors stood on the surface of Mars, but they quickly realized their situation was dire. Not only had they lost contact with the main ship, but they also landed far from their intended destination. Consulting their map, they identified the location of a bioengineering lab, which had ample oxygen and supplies. Their objective was to reach the lab before their oxygen ran out. One crew member was severely injured and unable to walk, forcing the rest to leave him behind. The remaining 4 headed toward the lab, feeling increasingly uneasy as they saw no traces of the jujube crops that had been cultivated for 2 decades. When they finally arrived at the lab, they were met with devastation. The base was dilapidated and abandoned, with no resources to sustain life. Their oxygen levels continued to deplete, and they resigned themselves to their fate, sitting on the barren Martian soil, awaiting death. Just as the first to run out of oxygen, Peter collapsed and reflexively removed his helmet. He was shocked to find that he could breathe. He immediately informed the others, who, in disbelief, opened their helmets and breathed in Mars air. Confused by this phenomenon, as previous tests had shown that oxygen levels were too low, they tried to contact Ellie on the ship to report their findings. As night fell and temperatures dropped, the team burned the abandoned base for warmth. Meanwhile, the discarded robotic dog found its way back to them. Peter inspected it and discovered severe damage to its internal chip. He planned to dismantle it to extract its power source. But the dog, upon realizing their intent, activated its combat mode and violently attacked them, seriously injuring Bowman before retreating to avoid further harm. Despite the danger posed by the rogue robot, the group pressed on and eventually found a discarded rover with a working radio. Successfully re-establishing contact with Ellie, she informed them that the ship had been severely damaged by the solar storm and could send a rescue pod. Their only hope was to walk 100 kilometers to reach the decades-old lander, as the Mars One's remaining fuel would not keep it in orbit much longer. With only 19 hours until the ship had to return to Earth, the scientists set out on foot. As they trekked across the Martian landscape, a new crisis arose. An enormous storm was forming directly in their path, with temperatures plunging to -50 degrees Celsius. They had no choice but to take shelter in a nearby cave. The robotic dog also arrived but chose not to attack, likely deterred by the fierce storm. In the cave, Peter revealed a secret. The lander could only accommodate 2 people, and he planned to sacrifice himself to draw the robot away. However, Jerry had other plans and stole the radio in an attempt to leave the group behind. His betrayal was short-lived as he was quickly killed by the robot. Now, only Peter and Bowman remained. As they searched for Jerry's body to retrieve the radio, they stumbled upon a massive field of algae and worms near his corpse. Bowman quickly realized that these worms must be consuming the algae, explaining the depletion of oxygen-producing plants. He began collecting samples but was suddenly swarmed by worms, drawn by the scent of his blood. In a desperate attempt to escape, he threw the samples to Peter before igniting the worms in a fiery explosion that spread across the surface. The shockwave reached all the way to Ellie, still in orbit, with Bowman gone and the oxygen depleted. Peter barely stayed conscious as he continued toward the lander. He finally reached it, but the lander's ignition battery was dead. At the same time, Mars 1 was forced to adjust its orbit, leaving Peter with no way to return. In his despair, he transmitted a final message to Ellie, confessing his long-held love for her before they lost contact. As Peter awaited his fate, the robotic dog's drone appeared. Realizing the dog had a high-voltage battery, Peter set a trap. When the dog arrived and initiated an attack, the trap detonated, destroying both the drone and the robot. With the battery in hand, Peter ignited the lander's engine and launched himself into space. However, halfway through, the lander ran out of power, leaving Peter unconscious.